Picture this. You're a kid back in the 1950s, sitting at the dinner table, sneaking some extra pinches of salt onto your potatoes when your parents aren't looking.
Ah, the good old days.
Seems innocent enough, right?
Yeah.
But that little cardboard salt box holds a secret.
Oh, a secret.
A story actually way more dramatic than you might think.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Today we're diving deep into the world of iodized salt.
Iodized salt. Sounds a bit mundane, doesn't it?
Well, you might think so,
Yeah.
but it's a simple twist on an everyday thing
Yeah.
that quite literally changed the world.
Okay, you've got my attention.
We're going back to a time when something called goiter was a huge health problem just because people weren't getting enough of a single element.
Let me guess. Is it iodine?
You got it. Iodine was the missing piece of the puzzle.
It's amazing how something so basic could cause such widespread problems.
It is, and today we're going to unravel that whole story
Looking forward to it.
from accidental discoveries to, public health crusades.
Now that sounds like a story.
You'll be surprised at how much drama is packed into those little salt crystals.
And for anyone new to the show, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got a whole archive of deep dives just like this one, uncovering the hidden stories behind everyday things.
Okay, so before we get to the salt itself, we need to understand why iodine is so important.
Right back to basics.
We all know it's good for the thyroid.
Yeah, but what does that really mean for our health?
Well, think of your thyroid like this tiny butterfly-shaped gland.
In your neck, right?
Yeah, right in your neck.
It's kind of running the show for your whole body.
Exactly. It produces these hormones that control everything, like your metabolism to your energy levels, even how you grow and develop.
And iodine's essential for all of that.
Exactly. So no iodine basically means no thyroid hormones.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you don't get enough iodine, well, your thyroid can't function properly.
And then what happens?
Well, one of the most obvious signs is goiter.
Goiter?
Yeah, it's a swelling of the thyroid gland.
Oh, I've heard of that.
It can make it hard to swallow, and in severe cases, it can even affect your breathing.
So it's not just cosmetic. It's a serious health issue.
Exactly. And for centuries, people had no idea what caused it.
What did they think caused it?
They blamed everything from bad water to even bad genes.
Oh, wow. That's pretty harsh, blaming it on people's genes.
Right. So how did they finally figure out that iodine was the missing link?
Yeah, how did they make that connection?
Well, it's a bit of a detective story starting back in 1811 with this French chemist named Bernard Courtois.
A French chemist? What does this have to do with iodine?
He was working with seaweed.
Seaweed. That's an interesting
He
combination.
was trying to extract saltpeter for gunpowder when he stumbled upon a brand new element,
And that was...
iodine.
Hold on. He found iodine while working with seaweed.
Yep. Seaweed's naturally rich in iodine, you see.
Huh. I never knew that.
So Courtois is adding sulfuric acid to the seaweed ash, and all of a sudden these bright violet vapors appear.
That was iodine.
That was iodine.
Wow, what a visual.
And the name iodine even comes from the Greek word for violet.
So it's named after its color.
Exactly.
Pretty cool. Huh.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So at first they thought iodine was some kind of cure-all.
Right. They were super excited about it. But they quickly learned that too much iodine could actually cause thyroid problems, too.
So it's all about balance.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot.
It sounds like it took a while to really understand how iodine works in the body.
It did. It took decades of research to figure out that delicate balance.
And were there any scientists who played a key role in that?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the first to really connect the dots was this Swiss physician named Jean-François Coindet.
A Swiss physician. Interesting.
Yeah, he started using iodine to treat goiter back in the 1820s. And he actually had some success, but figuring out the correct dosage was a big challenge.
I can imagine too little iodine wouldn't help, and too much could make things worse.
Exactly. It's like Goldilocks in the thyroid. You need just the right amount of iodine. I love that analogy. So they knew iodine was important, but the science was still catching up. Were there any big breakthroughs that really solidified that link between iodine and the thyroid?
Definitely. In 1895, a researcher named Eugen Baumann made a pivotal discovery.
What did he find?
He found iodine in the thyroid gland itself.
Wow, so iodine is actually a component of the thyroid. That's huge.
It was. Unfortunately, he died young, so his research was cut short.
Oh, that's a shame.
But it did pave the way for other scientists to continue his work.
Okay, so who picked up the torch after Baumann?
A man named David Marine in the early 1900s.
David Marine.
Yeah, she started by studying goiter in brook trout.
Brook trout. That's an interesting choice.
Right. But he proved that iodine deficiency was the culprit.
So he started with fish and then moved on to humans.
Exactly. And he did this groundbreaking study with schoolgirls in Akron, Ohio, showing that giving them iodine supplements dramatically reduced goiter rates.
From fish to schoolgirls who knew. So by this point, the evidence was pretty clear. No iodine, you get goiter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But knowing is one thing, and actually doing something about it on a large scale is a whole other challenge.
So how did they go from knowing about the problem to actually solving it?
Well, that's where our story takes a fascinating turn. We're going to zoom in on two places with surprisingly high goiter rates.
Okay, where are we going?
Switzerland, nestled in the Alps,
Switzerland? That's surprising. I wouldn't have thought of that.
and a region in the U.S. that became known as the Goiter Belt.
The goiter belt. Where's that?
It was mainly around the Great Lakes.
Interesting. So Switzerland and the goiter belt, two unlikely partners in the fight against iodine deficiency.
Exactly. And we'll dive into their stories and how they tackled this global health crisis right after a quick break. Stay tuned.
Both Switzerland and that goiter belt around the Great Lakes, well, they had something in common. Their soil was seriously lacking in iodine.
So you're saying that people weren't getting enough iodine just from living there?
Right. Imagine living in a place where even the food and water weren't giving you this essential element.
That's crazy to think about. So what did they do about it?
Well, in Switzerland, a doctor named Otto Bayard decided to try a little experiment.
An experiment with iodine.
Yeah, he focused on this remote village with a ton of goiter cases and gave a few families iodized salt.
Was this like before iodized salt was a thing you could just buy at the store?
Exactly. It was the early 1900s. He was basically making it himself, just adding iodine to regular salt.
I see. So did it work?
The results were pretty impressive. The families using the iodized salt, their goiters actually shrank and there were no side effects.
So it was a success.
Yeah, it was a small study for sure, but it showed that this simple solution could really work.
Wow. So Switzerland was on the right track.
Yeah.
What about the goiter belt in the U.S.? How did they catch on to this whole iodized salt thing?
Their wake-up call came during World War I.
World War I, what does that have to do with goiter?
A doctor named Simon Levin was giving physicals to guys signing up for the military,
Okay.
and he found a shocking number of young men with goiters.
A lot of them.
So many that they were deemed unfit for service.
Wow. So goiter was actually impacting national security.
It became a major concern, and luckily a pediatrician named David Murray Cowie at the University of Michigan took on the challenge.
What did he do?
He'd heard about those Swiss experiments with iodized salt and thought, why not try that here?
So Michigan got inspiration from Switzerland.
Exactly. It's amazing how these discoveries traveled across the world.
It shows how important collaboration is. So Cowie became a champion for iodized salt in Michigan.
He was a tireless advocate.
And he's often credited with, leading the first large-scale use of iodized salt in the U.S.
He played a key role for sure.
Okay, so now we're getting to the heart of the story. The iodized salt revolution. But I'm curious, why salt? Why not just give people iodine supplements or find other ways to get it in their diet?
Well, salt was the perfect vehicle for a few reasons.
Like what?
First, everyone used salt no matter where they lived or how much money they had.
It was a...
Exactly. So they didn't have to invent a whole new product or figure out how to get it to people.
Right. Salt was already everywhere.
Second, salt was cheap.
So you could add iodine without making it too expensive.
Right. It had to be affordable for everyone. And third, people tend to use salt at a pretty consistent rate.
It's not like a seasonal thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it guaranteed a regular dose of iodine.
Which was crucial for addressing the deficiency.
Yeah.
But what about the sodium? Weren't people concerned about that back then?
You know what? Back then, sodium wasn't really a big public health issue.
Interesting how times have changed.
It is. So using salt to deliver iodine just made sense. It was practical and affordable.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so they had the perfect delivery system with salt. But how did they actually make iodized salt a reality in Michigan? Was it easy to convince everyone?
Well, it wasn't without its challenges.
I
Cowie had to convince both the public and the salt industry that it was safe and effective.
can imagine the salt industry wasn't thrilled about changing their product.
Yeah. He had to work closely with the Michigan Salt Producers Association.
Bunch of salt barons, I imagine.
You could say that they were mainly worried about how adding iodine would affect the salt.
What were they concerned about?
Would it change the taste or the color? Would it clump up or not dissolve properly?
Yeah, you don't want to mess with people's salt.
Right. And they didn't want to scare off customers.
So how did he win them over?
He brought in some heavy hitters, a chemist from Dow Chemical Company.
Wow. Bring out the big guns.
They ran tests and showed that adding iodine wouldn't affect the salt's flavor, color, or texture.
So science saved the day.
It did. But it wasn't just about convincing the salt producers. There was a whole public education campaign, too.
Of course. You had to get the people on board.
Right. Cowie and his team went all out to spread the word about iodized salt and why it was so important.
What did they do?
They gave tons of lectures all across Michigan, partnered with newspapers and radio stations, even worked with schools to teach kids about iodine.
So it was a full-blown media blitz.
Pretty much. They really wanted to change people's minds about iodized salt.
Smart. So how did they actually get the iodine into the salt?
It was actually pretty simple. Salt companies were already adding magnesium carbonate to prevent clumping.
Okay,
So they just started adding potassium iodide at the same time.
that makes sense. It's all about streamlining the process.
Exactly. It was a cost-effective way to integrate iodine into the existing system.
So when did iodized salt finally hit the shelves in Michigan?
In March of 1924, the Michigan State Medical Society gave iodized salt their official stamp of approval.
Big moment.
And by May, 6 different salt companies were selling it throughout the state.
That's amazing. So what happened?
The results were pretty incredible.
Like, how incredible?
Follow-up studies showed that goiter rates dropped dramatically,
By how much?
up to 90% in some areas.
90%. That's a huge success.
It was a major public health victory.
So did the rest of the U.S. follow suit.
Morton Salt, one of the biggest names in the salt game, they were hesitant at first.
I can imagine they probably didn't want to change their product for just a few states.
Right. But after seeing how well it worked in Michigan and with all the public education efforts, iodized salt went national by the fall of 1924.
So Michigan led the way for the whole country.
They were pioneers in the fight against iodine deficiency.
It's really inspiring to see how collaboration and innovation can solve such huge health problems. But I'm curious, even with all that success, were there still people who doubted the benefits of iodized salt?
You'd be surprised. Some experts, even after seeing those amazing results with goiter, still thought it was caused by other things like better sanitation or clean water.
So they weren't convinced it was the iodine.
It took a while for everyone to agree on the science and fully accept just how crucial iodine is.
It's interesting how even with clear evidence, it can take time to change people's minds. What about places where iodized salt wasn't a feasible solution? Were there other ways to get people the iodine they needed?
Yeah, definitely. In some areas, they used iodized poppy seed oil.
Poppy seed oil.
It's actually a great source of iodine. They used it especially for pregnant women and young children.
Huh. I learn something new every day.
And in other regions, they added iodine to irrigation water or animal feed, hoping it would make its way into the food chain.
So different approaches for different situations.
Exactly. And while iodized salt became the most widespread solution, those other methods helped too, especially in places where it was harder to get iodized salt to everyone.
It's pretty amazing how creative people can get when faced with a health crisis.
Yeah.
So we've seen the triumph of iodized salt. But what about today? What's the state of iodine in the modern world?
Well, that's a great question, and it leads us into a whole other chapter in the story of iodine.
Oh.
It's not all good news, unfortunately. But we'll get into all of that after a quick break.
So we left off on a bit of a cliffhanger. You said it's not all good news with iodine in the modern world. What's the catch?
Well, you know how we're all so health conscious these days? All these new diets and food trends?
Yeah, what about it?
Turns out some of those healthy habits might actually be hurting our iodine intake.
Really? Even with iodized salt?
Yep, even in places where iodized salt's super common.
But how? I mean, it's in everything.
Well, for starters, we're all cutting back on salt.
Yeah, doctors are always honest about that.
Right, too much sodium, bad for blood pressure. So we try to eat less salt.
Makes sense.
But that means less iodine, too. Even if the salt we are using is iodized.
But it's a trade-off.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Like we're trying to be healthy in one way, but might be missing out on something essential in the process.
Right. And it's not just about how much salt we're using either.
Yeah.
We're about all those fancy salts. You know, the Himalayan pink salt, the sea salt, all that.
Oh, yeah, those gourmet salt.
They're everywhere these days.
They sound so much healthier than plain old table salt, right?
Exactly. That's what I thought too. My pantry's full of them.
Well, here's the thing. Most of those specialty salts aren't iodized.
Oh, really?
You can find some iodized versions, but you gotta look carefully.
I never even thought about that.
They're marketed as being natural and unrefined, which appeals to health-conscious consumers.
Right? So we might be getting trace minerals from those fancy salts, but missing out on iodine.
Exactly.
Wow, it's like trading one problem for another.
Kind of. And here's another twist that might surprise you. Dairy products are actually a big source of iodine these days.
Wait, dairy. I thought iodine came mainly from seafood and seaweed.
That's what most people think. But it's not like cows are out there grazing on iodine-rich pastures or anything.
So where's the iodine coming from?
It actually comes from the sanitizers they use in the dairy industry.
The sanitizers.
Yeah, they use iodine-based sanitizers, and that iodine ends up in the milk.
And then we drink it.
Exactly. It's kind of a roundabout way for us to get iodine, but it works.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
So what happens when people switch to those plant-based milks? Almond milk, soy milk, oat milk, all that stuff.
That's a good question. And yeah, that's another potential issue. Those alternatives usually don't have any iodine unless they're specifically fortified.
So as more people ditch dairy,
Hmm.
they might be accidentally lowering their iodine intake.
It's definitely something to think about.
It sounds like the modern diet, with all its trends and changes, is making things a lot more complicated when it comes to iodine.
It is. And on top of all that, it's actually really hard to track exactly how much iodine people are getting.
Why is that? Don't food labels have to list the iodine content?
Well, in the US, they only list iodine if it's been added.
So what about naturally occurring iodine?
Nope, that doesn't have to be on the label.
That's crazy. So you could be eating something that's naturally high in iodine and have no idea.
Exactly. And that makes it tough to figure out your overall intake. Plus, it creates problems for people who need to limit their iodine intake.
Like people with thyroid conditions.
Exactly.
Wow. So what's the takeaway here? What should people keep in mind when it comes to iodine?
I think the most important thing is just to be aware of your iodine intake.
Especially if you're doing things like cutting back on salt or switching to non-dairy milk.
Right. If you're concerned about your thyroid or if you're just not sure how much iodine you're getting, talk to your doctor. They can even check your iodine levels if needed.
Great advice. It seems like the story of iodized salt is way more relevant today than ever.
It really is. We've made incredible progress fighting iodine deficiency, but it's an ongoing battle.
So iodized salt, a simple thing with a really complex history, and it all started with people just trying to figure out how to get enough of this one essential element.
It's amazing how something so small can have such a huge impact on global health.
The iodized salt story, it's full of surprises. From accidental discoveries to public health triumphs, it really makes you appreciate the interconnectedness of everything. Our diet, our environment, our health.
And it highlights how important science communication and collaboration are for tackling these big challenges.
Exactly. So listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this deep dive into iodized salt. Did you learn anything new? Any surprises? Let us know. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more fascinating explorations of the world around us. Until next time, stay curious.